Prominent. Important, famous, noticeable. No word has ever been more attached to an individual than the word prominent to City of Orange pioneer, DeWitt Clinton Pixley. Through over 148 newspaper stories, D.C. Pixley's life reads like a life of optimism and entrepreneurism as he focused on building the growth of Orange. To tell the story of the home he built on 288 North Olive Street, the story of the man who built it must also be told, along with the other families who lived in the house since 1895. This is the history of Pixley Manor. The Pixley years. DeWitt Clinton Pixley and his wife, Florence, arrived in Orange from Illinois in 1881 and lived on a ranch outside of town. The following year, he purchased from R. L. Crowder a small, wooden store, located on the northwest corner of Glassell Street and the Plaza. With youth and ambition, D.C. turned a rundown general merchandise store and doubled its business in less than a year. 2 years later, he needed larger quarters. In 1883, D.C. and Florence helped found the first Christian Church of Orange. In 1886, D.C. purchased 2 lots north of his first store and built the first brick building in Orange at 122 North Glassell Street for $5,000. The Pixley store sold general merchandise, furniture, and farm implements. The following years would be a time of store expansion and taking on new responsibilities within the community. In 1887, D.C. founded and became director of the Orange Building and Loan Association. In 1888, D.C. partnered with his nephew Jaunty Purcell Boring to include hardware in the store for all the new homes being built. He was the first president of the Orange Public Library and a director and stockholder of the Bank of Orange. From this time forward, D.C. Pixley's life would increase in financial strength and leadership positions. Between 1890 and 1894, D.C. would purchase hundreds of acres of land in Orange, Arch Beach, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Big Bear, building beach houses, cabins, aviaries, bee colonies, and a stock ranch in Santiago Canyon. An empire was in the making. It wouldn't be long before he was appointed president of the First National Bank and the city treasurer and being the president of the Olive Milling Company. On September 11, 1895, D.C. bought lots 1 through 6 and 11 through 16 in the Davis Tract. With the design work from architect Cornelius B. Bradshaw, lots 1 and 2 became the new Pixley Mansion, and in just 3 months, on December 19, 1895, the Pixley family moved in and celebrated their first Christmas. Life went on as it tends to do. Family gatherings, parties, bridge games, and Mrs. Pixley's tea socials on Thursdays, all encompassed the simple life of the Victorian era. D.C. continued with land purchases, including owning a part of the Santiago Creek, and camping expeditions to Bakersfield and Big Bear. In 1900, the Arch Beach cottage was burglarized by a man named Hobo Williams who was carrying stolen objects in a suitcase. The jailer opened the suitcase and discovered items with D.C. Pixley's name on them. Hobo Williams was sent to San Quentin. In 1902, D.C. was appointed the supervisor of roads and is responsible for the earliest paving over dirt roads throughout downtown Orange and the outlying farmlands. He also purchased the first ladder wagon for the Orange Fire Department. In 1910, one of the Pixley daughters, Florence Floy, was married in the home's library under a canopy of pink hollyhock blossoms and ropes of asparagus. 65 guests sat in the large and small dining rooms for a 5-course meal. Overseas, in China, the Boxer Rebellion has been raging for several years. By 1911, hundreds of Chinese men were smuggled into Laguna Beach for rifle training for Sun Yat-sen's rebel army. The Pixley cottage served as a signal point for the smugglers' boats. In the end, the rebels overthrew the monarchy and China became a republic. In 1914, D.C. built Tamarack Lodge in Big Bear, a place where family, friends, and dignitaries can enjoy the wonders of nature. Trips would often go as long as several weeks to several months. In May 1915, D.C. was trapped in snow for 2 weeks before being rescued. He was fine, but other campers were ill from the hardships they faced. Also in 1915, at the Pixley residence and other residences, the first meetings for creating a women's club took place. Mrs. Pixley was chosen as first vice president and would later become president from 1916 to 1917. In October of 1915, Mr. and Mrs. Pixley set sail on the SS Harvard toward San Francisco to attend the World Exposition. DC's curiosity for the future of technology and cultural enlightenment has always made him travel to nearby locations, but later in the year, his health began to decline, and traveling abroad was his best medicine. He set off to Tahiti, New Zealand, and Australia, and returned to Orange 4 months later in much better health. His extended travel was due to his lost passport in Australia and stowing away on a Canadian steamer to get back home. At the time DC was traveling to Cuba and New York City, the United States entered World War I on April 6, 1917. 1 month later, DC was appointed publicity manager for the Liberty Bond issue for Orange and the vicinity. As the president of Orange National Bank, he was well qualified to tell the public the importance of how investing in bonds with the U.S. government provided a higher rate of return compared to a savings bank. The rally raised $30,000 from the city. At the Olive Milling Company, since every employee purchased a Liberty Bond, DC and the board gave their employees a raise for showing genuine patriotism and thrift. 1 month later, the mill reported to its stockholders their biggest earnings ever. In March of 1918, DC was honored by being named director of the Fidelity Savings and Loan Association of Los Angeles based on his positions as president of the Olive Milling Company, of the National Bank of Orange, and of the Orange Building and Loan Association, a $600,000 association amid a city of 5,000 inhabitants. At the end of March, with the government recognizing and respecting his many positions and his service to the nation's war bond effort, DC was invited to review the troops at Camp Kearny in San Diego. In April of 1918, 1 year after leading his first Liberty Bond issue, DC was once again asked to lead the charge for the next rally. He spoke of the accomplishments of past Liberty Bond rallies and expressed confidence that the city of Orange was going to raise $225,000, only to exceed those expectations. In October of 1918, a Liberty tank rolled into Orange. Made of wood and attached to a car, this tank served as a platform to rally for more Liberty Bonds. The public anticipated a victory in the war, so DC gave $5,000 to get the rally going. In the end, Orange enjoyed the distinction of beating every city in the county on Tank Day. With the Great War over, it was time to build up peace. In February of 1919, Mrs. Pixley was honored by the Governor of California, William Stevens, for being appointed an honorary delegate to the Pacific Coast Congress of the League of Nations in San Francisco. Although Mrs. Pixley and Mrs. Stevens were great friends, the honor was to reflect Mrs. Pixley's pioneer spirit, a woman of brilliancy as well as a charming personality. In March of 1919, DC retired as president of the Orange Building and Loan Association, the National Bank of Orange, and as superintendent of the Olive Milling Company, although he was still its president. In October, the mill was sold to the Central Milling Company and he retired from there. In October of 1921, the Pixleys sold the home they built on 288 North Olive Street to Dr. James Crawford. They bought a smaller mansion for $7,300 on 192 North Schaefer Street and continued their social lives in the new home. In 1921, the Pixleys purchased their first car, a 1919 Studebaker touring car. Newspapers reported several times of their travels throughout California. In January of 1923, DC traveled to Brazil to attend the International Exposition. Along the way, through Panama, DC met with old friends on the boat, ex-Governor Bothwell of Missouri and ex-Governor Yeater of the Philippines, who were also attending the exposition. DC returned home on Mother's Day after a 4-month trip, where all the children and grandchildren welcomed DC home. In December of 1929, with the Depression going on for 4 months, the First National Bank and Orange Savings Bank showed the public that their banks were not phased even though other banks were failing. 2 years later, the California government established a new law to safeguard loan investors. The Orange Building and Loan Association showed they were still going strong. In December of 1935, D.C. suffered a heart attack only to have a relapse in January. The following years would be slower times, yet he still insisted on being on the board and spending more time with family. On August 28, 1937, D.C. Pixley passed away, or as the newspapers called it, he was summoned or called by death. The First Christian Church was filled with family, friends, business associates, and the general public who all came to pay tribute to a man who took a small hamlet and made it a modern city. Reverend Franklin Mink led the funeral rites and told of D.C.'s extensive aid to the poor, which D.C. never wanted his acts of charity to become known to the public until now. A month later, the tributes continued for D.C. with the 50th anniversary of the Building and Loan Association. Many news stories told of the importance of this one man. One, in particular, stated that D.C. not only saw the city grow, but it was his spirit, his guiding hand, his conservative financial discipline, and his handiwork that figured into the development of Orange from a business, financial, cultural, and spiritual standpoint. What better heritage could a man leave than this? In May of 1938, Mrs. Pixley underwent an emergency operation after she was stricken with an illness in her 192 Schaefer home. Mrs. Pixley seemed to recover a few days later but then relapsed. By May 30, 1938, Mrs. Pixley was summoned by death. As her husband was involved in all things business and financial, Mrs. Pixley's life was devoted to community and church affairs, including charitable activities which she carried out quietly and unassumingly. DeWitt Clinton Pixley and Florence Pixley now rest at Fairhaven Cemetery. The Crawford years. Dr. James Calvin Crawford was the second owner of the Pixley House. He started his medical career while serving in Sheridan's Pennsylvania Cavalry as a first sergeant during the Spanish-American War. Afterwards, he had a practice for 12 years until he felt compelled to own land in Pasadena and Banning, California. He and his family arrived in Orange in 1916. At the same time, Dr. Daniel F. Royer, a leading physician in Orange and the county, was looking for an assistant, and so, Drs. Royer and Crawford formed a partnership for the practice of medicine and surgery. In 1917, two trains collided in Banning, California, and ignited a fire that destroyed Dr. Crawford's 10 acres of peaches, olives, and almonds. In July of 1918, Dr. Crawford was appointed as city health officer, since this position was left vacant by Dr. Chapman, who was called to the Medical Reserve Corps during World War I. Later that year, the Spanish flu epidemic broke out. With a few flu cases in the county, it was hoped that large gathering closures would not be needed. However, the flu cases increased and Dr. Crawford had to give the order to close all Orange schools, churches, and theaters to prevent the spread of the disease. Within 2 weeks, flu masks were issued. Business circles listed masks to be a popular fall fashion style. Dr. Crawford strongly urged people to either stay home or wear a mask when out in public. 5 weeks later, with cases decreasing, the flu ban was lifted and Orange returned to normal. In October of 1921, the Crawfords bought the Pixley home to house their 2 boys and 3 girls just like the Pixleys. Life went on with Dr. Crawford running his practice and his wife Laura hosting many social events in the home. They also bought a new 7-passenger Studebaker touring car. Then, came the Depression. In 1932, Dr. Crawford defaulted on the mortgage, and Orange Savings Bank took over the property. The Crawfords moved into the smaller home on 127 North Grand Street that Dr. Crawford was using as an office. Along with his practice, Dr. Crawford was president of the Orange County Medical Society, president of the Orange Rotary Club, and a member of the Orange Elks Lodge 1475. In August of 1953, Dr. Crawford suffered a heart attack but recovered and continued medicine until his passing in August 1956 and laid to rest in Fairhaven Cemetery. The Harris years. After the Orange Savings Bank took over the Pixley home, it sat vacant for 3 years, until in 1935, Sherwood Prince Harris and his wife Esther bought the house and converted it into 8 small apartments for low-income renters and the occasional family member visit. 4 years later, in 1939, Mr. Harris suffered a stroke and passed away 1 week later. Life for Esther Harris would continue operating the home for renters and holding social events like the Daughters of the Confederacy and multiple book clubs here and at her Newport Beach house. Of the tenants who lived in the house, most just lived their lives working in nearby factories and packing houses, but some lives made stories in newspapers. A Miss Anne Mary Bartlett, who worked at the Consolidated Orange Growers, enlisted in the U.S. Navy Women's Reserve or WAVES in 1943. A James F. Dennison, who worked at the Anaconda Wire and Cable Company, was living here when his son became a World War II hero. In the winter of early 1945, Private First Class James H. Dennison crawled along an icy tile roof in France to attach a radio antenna while ducking mortar fire and gunshots. He received a Bronze Star for his bravery. After the war, the father moved to a rest home, and the war hero's son turned Loyola University law instructor lived at 288. James H. Dennison would later become an attorney in Los Angeles. A circus clown named Happy Kelly and his wife Laura lived here. Tenant Ted Anderson and his friend Tim Peterson reported a UFO sighting to the police when they saw a long bar with a ball underneath flying 5,000 feet over Orange. In January 1956, Esther Harris' sister Ann Hunter, who had a residence in Santa Ana but was convalescing from an illness at 288, passed away in the house. Later, in October 1956, Esther Harris sold the house to Chapman College for $27,300 and would be known as Harris House Chapman College. Esther Harris retired and passed away in 1977 and interned in Fairhaven Cemetery. Chapman College years. With Chapman College expanding, a new dormitory was needed. But for the meantime, large homes like the Pixley Mansion served as dorms. In 1959, a men's and women's dormitory was built, and the house continued to be a dorm until 1960. For the next 16 years, the house served as the Chapman College Management Center and business classes were taught here as well. By 1976, Chapman College needed money and began selling off its outer properties. The former Pixley Mansion was up for sale. The Vogelvang years.
How did we get the house?
I sat in the paper
Found the ad in the paper.
on Thursday.
And that was on a Thursday. And I didn't even know Orange existed, you know. So I said, oh, maybe after choir I can take a look. So I came down, it's dark. The moon was shining on top of the tree. And I looked at the other corners. Now, this was it. But I could hardly believe it. So I called the real estate the next morning. And he said, yeah, that was the right place. I said, wow, I want to see that.
Yeah.
So he said, when? I said, right now. So he came over, he said, come on over. Looked at it, and I just fell in love with it. So that's it. So many things you can do with this house. It was a mess inside though, but okay. But then I had to convince her. She came over, yeah, if you can do it, fix it up, let's do it. That's how we got it.
But I asked you, where's the kitchen? He said, every house has a
That's he
kitchen.
woke up in the middle of the night. And he said, did you see the kitchen somewhere? And no, but I'm pretty sure there's a kitchen in a big house like that. So I called the realtor again. Yeah, I hate to tell you that, there's no kitchen. Because it was mostly office space.
Chapman.
And the attic was telephone stations. So no kitchen, they didn't need the kitchen. So that was a big problem. Yeah. I went to the cabinet maker. I said, I need a kitchen real quick. I don't care how it looks. I need a kitchen cabinets, right? So he did a fantastic job. It took him 3 days. We had some small cabinets here and there. The kitchen was small because there was actually no kitchen. So we had 2 small bathrooms in the back of the house. I took the bathrooms out, took everything out, and that became the kitchen. So that's how we started.
That's what we started. With
But
all those
that
kids.
took us about a couple months, and you were rinsing the dishes
Outside.
but in a water hose. Yeah. So anyway, and then we started building and redoing the rooms. We had about, I don't know how many rooms we got in that whole place, about 10. And they all had a different color. You got blue, yellow, green, white. I'm not kidding. And the beautiful fireplaces and doors and the staircase, all painted white. All white. I said, this is wood. How can you paint wood like that? It's awful. So we stripped it, furnished it. The fireplace, we had a fireplace, and that took weeks before that got clean. With all those little
Stones.
little things, you know. I was with a little needle, but there's a lot of work. So little by little, here we are. But over the years, we did a lot of work. There was nothing on the outside, nothing. And from what I heard, they actually want to get rid of this place because it's a nice big property. And this place, according to them, was condemned. So I had a little trouble staying here and convincing that this place is built better than any houses they got around lately, you know. And so we stayed here. And we're still here. So over the years, yes, we did a lot of work. We, especially around the house, we had a pool, we had a beautiful yard, and we just loved this place. And of course, we started with, we had 5 children, 5 kids. And jumping up the staircase downstairs too, that was fun. And rollerblading even, when we took the carpet out, it was easy to rollerblade, right? And bowling. Yeah, it became a bowling alley with pins set up. And I don't know who won, but it was always fun to do that. A little noisy though, kind of noisy. If you sit here and you hear the ball, the house is coming down, you know. And all the kids got married, and here we were alone.
The 2 of us.
So we took some students, and we had about most of the time 5 because we got plenty of rooms. It was fantastic. We did that for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And now they're all gone, and here we are, just the 2 of us again.
Yeah.
So one of Pixley's daughter over, she was 92 that time. She saw us in the paper, and she said to her daughter was 76 that time, she said, I would love to see the place one more time. So the daughter said, well, let's go. So she called us and said, please come on over. And the stories we had, the lady was amazing. She wanted to see the attic. I said, ooh, you're 92. No, she moved like she was 60. Go up to the attic. She wanted to see the attic. Now, in the attic, if you're at the end of the steps, you got a big beam coming down like that. There's room enough, but I mean, I told everybody, watch your head, you know. You don't hit it. So I said, Mrs. Pixley, watch your head. She turned around and said, I know this place better than you, Sonny. I never forget that. But a lot of things she remembered, like the doorknobs and the corner this and corner, and what they did upstairs.
And the doors
and the door. She loved everything.
Yeah.
So that was a great moment. And she told us a lot of things. And she passed away, I think, when she was 102. She moved out of the house when she was 17. The Pixley family moved. So she moved out, she was 17, and the first time she came back, she was 92.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? I still remember a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
The Pixley family was, or us, about the same as the Pixley family. They had 5 kids, 2 boys, 3 daughters. We got the same thing. He loved to travel.
I love to travel. I don't.
She loved parties, Christmas parties, Easter parties, Halloween parties, all parties. And we actually found some tickets from a Christmas dinner, 15 cents dinner, Christmas dinner. So she was very well organized lady. But the daughter was a super nice lady too. This house became popular because you always had a boutique.
Yeah.
Every year, no, twice a year. You had Easter boutique and a Christmas boutique. A lot of people loved it. And still, people coming down, when is your boutique? No more.
No more.
No more. Then we had all the choir parties. And we got hundreds of people coming over from Europe, from Holland. Parties again. It's all her fault. Anyway.
Yeah, my fault. Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's it.
That is it.
The Vogelvangs have lived here for 48 years as of 2024, and they have similar experiences as those that have lived here before. The Pixleys, Crawfords, and Vogelvangs all raised 2 boys and 3 girls. The men of these families, including Mr. Harris, all had businesses and other properties. The women of these families all had social events, such as book clubs, church events, and boutiques. What will the future hold for the Pixley Manor? As a landmark of Victorian design and style, it will continue to be a historic treasure for all who pass by, or visit the city of Orange.